The ruthless billionaire's fiancé sent the maid to jail with a false accusation, until the maid's toddler spoke up. "My mommy didn't do it. She's good. She's good. Please don't take my mommy." The tiny voice cut through the cold marble hallway like a lightning bolt through a winter sky. 3-year-old Lily Thompson stood in the center of the grand foyer of Cole Mansion, a home so enormous it had its own name, so polished it could have passed for a palace, with her little fists balled at her sides and tears streaming freely down her chubby cheeks. She was still wearing her pajamas, the ones with the little yellow ducks printed across the fabric, because nobody had bothered to dress her before the chaos began. Her dark curls were wild around her face, and one tiny sock had slipped off her foot somewhere between the kitchen and the hallway, leaving one bare sole pressed against the cold tile. But she stood her ground. 2 police officers flanked her mother, Lena Martinez, who was being marched toward the front door with her wrists in handcuffs. Lena's face was pale. Her eyes were dry. She had already used up every tear she had in the past 15 minutes, but her chin trembled with the effort of holding herself together. She had not looked at her daughter. She couldn't, because if she did, she knew she would fall completely apart, and she refused to do that in front of her. Refused to let Lily see her break. "Lily, baby," Lena said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Go back to the kitchen. Go find Mrs. Huang." "No." Lily shook her head so hard her curls flew. "No. I'm not going. Mommy, I'm not going." At the top of the grand staircase, one hand resting elegantly on the carved mahogany banister, stood Vanessa Holt. She was dressed in a silk robe the color of champagne, her blonde hair swept perfectly over one shoulder, her lips curved into a smile so thin it barely qualified as one. She looked down at the scene below her with a calm, satisfied expression of a woman who had gotten exactly what she wanted. Which, of course, she had. "I don't understand what the fuss is about," Vanessa said, her voice carrying the crisp, clipped authority of a woman who had never once been told no. The necklace was in her room. It was found in her room. The evidence speaks for itself. The necklace in question was a diamond piece worth $120,000, a gift from Adrian Cole to Vanessa, purchased on a trip to New York last fall. It had gone missing 3 days ago. That morning, quite conveniently, it had turned up tucked inside the small canvas bag that Lena kept her personal items in, stored in the servants' quarters at the far east wing of the mansion. Lena had not put it there. She knew she had not put it there. Every single member of the household staff, all 9 of them, knew Lena Martinez was the most honest person in that building. She had worked in the Cole household for 4 years. She had never once taken so much as a dinner roll from the kitchen without asking. She was the kind of woman who left a handwritten apology note if she accidentally broke a dish. But none of that mattered right now, because Vanessa had smiled and pointed, and the wheels of consequence had begun turning. "Ma'am," one of the officers said gently to Lily, crouching slightly, "you need to step aside, sweetheart." "No," Lily said again, planting both feet. "You can't take my mommy. She didn't steal anything. My mommy doesn't steal. She told me stealing is wrong. She would never." The officer glanced helplessly at his partner. From the far end of the hallway, near the private study, a door opened. And everyone in the room, the officers, Vanessa, the 3 staff members who had gathered in the corridor with wide, frightened eyes, went very still. Adrian Cole had entered the room. He was tall. That was the first thing anyone ever noticed about him. 6'3", broad-shouldered, with the kind of build that suggested he had never once stopped pushing himself, even when he could have paid someone else to do the pushing for him. He was 41 years old and looked like life had carved him rather than grown him, all sharp lines and cool eyes the color of a winter lake, gray-blue and still and completely unreadable. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, which was unusual. He was dressed in a black dress shirt, top button undone, sleeves rolled to the elbows. He had clearly been working. He always was. Adrian Cole ran a global investment firm valued at $43 billion. He was known in boardrooms from Manhattan to Seoul as a man of absolute precision. He did not raise his voice. He did not repeat himself. He did not negotiate once he had made a decision. And he had not, in recent memory, been surprised by anything. Until now. His eyes swept the room. Lena in handcuffs. The officers. The frightened staff huddled near the kitchen door. Vanessa at the top of the stairs, serene and smiling. And Lily, tiny, wild-haired, one-socked Lily, standing in the middle of his foyer like a small, furious lighthouse in a storm, tears on her cheeks and her chin held high. Their eyes met. Something shifted in Adrian's chest. It was subtle, like a single thread pulling loose from a very tightly wound spool. Almost nothing. Almost imperceptible. Almost. "What?" he said, his voice low and precise. "Is happening in my house?" Vanessa began to speak. Lily spoke louder. "She lied." Lily cried, pointing one small finger directly up at Vanessa. "That lady lied. My mommy didn't take anything. She didn't. She would never. She's good. She's the best." Silence fell over the entire mansion like a held breath. And for the very first time in a long, long while, Adrian Cole did not know what to say. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but in those few seconds, the entire room seemed to forget how to breathe. Vanessa recovered first. "Adrian, darling," she said, descending 3 steps on the staircase with a kind of graceful, practiced ease that spoke to years of knowing exactly how to make an entrance. "I'm so glad you're here. As I explained to the officers, I discovered the necklace. Your necklace, the one you gave me, in this woman's belongings. I think it's fairly clear what happened." Adrian did not look at Vanessa. He was still looking at Lily. The little girl had not moved. She was still standing in the center of the foyer, still pointing, still trembling with the particular full-body intensity that only children are capable of, the kind of emotional honesty that adults spend years learning to suppress. Her lower lip was quivering, but she wasn't backing down. She kept her eyes locked on Adrian's with a ferocity that was, frankly, astonishing in someone who barely cleared 3 feet tall. "She lied," Lily repeated, her voice smaller now but no less certain. "I know she lied." Adrian finally moved. He walked forward slowly, his footsteps deliberate and quiet against the marble, and he crouched down, all 6 feet 3 inches of him folding carefully until he was at eye level with the child. It was not a natural posture for him. He could not remember the last time he had crouched down to speak to anyone. He did not have children. He did not particularly seek the company of children. His world was boardrooms and balance sheets and the cold arithmetic of profit. But something in him said, "Be small for her. She needs that right now." "What's your name?" he asked. "Lily," she said. And then, because her mother had raised her with manners even in crisis, "Lily Thompson." "Lily Thompson," he repeated quietly. "How old are you?" She held up 3 fingers. Then a 4th started to rise, and she tucked it back down. 3. Almost 4. Almost 4. He nodded, as if this were important information, as if this were a boardroom exchange, and she were an executive briefing him on critical data. He kept his voice even, calm. "Lily, can you tell me why you think," he paused, "why you think that lady lied?" Lily's eyes flicked up to Vanessa, then back to Adrian. She leaned forward slightly, the way children do when they're about to share something important, and lowered her voice to something between a whisper and regular volume, which meant everyone could still hear her perfectly. "Because," she said, "I saw her." The temperature in the room dropped 3 degrees. "You saw her?" Adrian asked carefully. Lily nodded vigorously. "I woke up in the night because I was thirsty, and I went to find Mommy, and I saw that lady going into Mommy's room. And I thought maybe she was going to be nice, but Mommy says I should always tell the truth even when it's scary." She paused and swallowed. "So, I'm telling the truth, even though it's scary." One of the officers had taken a small notepad from his breast pocket. Lena, who had been standing with her head down, her handcuffed wrists in front of her, raised her eyes slowly. She looked at her daughter. Her face crumpled. "Baby," she whispered. "I'm okay, Mommy," Lily said immediately, turning to give her mother the most heartbreaking, reassuring smile any human being had ever produced. "I'm okay. I'm gonna fix it." Adrian stood up slowly. He turned to look at the officers. When he spoke, his voice had changed. It was no longer the carefully moderated tone he'd used with Lily. It was the voice of a man who was accustomed to ending conversations. "Remove the handcuffs," he said. "Adrian," Vanessa began.
"Now," he said.
He did not raise his voice. He never did. But the word landed like a door slamming shut. The officer nearest Lena stepped forward and, without further discussion, unlocked the cuffs. Lena's arms fell free. She pressed her wrist to her chest and stood very still, as if she didn't quite trust the air yet. Lily launched herself across the foyer and crashed into her mother's legs so hard that Lena stumbled back a full step. She dropped to her knees on the marble floor, handcuff marks still red on her wrists, and gathered her daughter up completely. Lily pressed her face into her mother's neck and began to cry, not the furious, courageous crying of before, but the deep, shuddering sobs of a child who had been terrified and was now, finally, allowed to admit it. "I've got you," Lena murmured, rocking her. "I've got you, I've got you, I've got you." Adrian watched them. Something in his chest pulled again, harder this time. That same loose thread, unwinding further. He had watched a lot of things in his life from a position of emotional remove. It was, he had long believed, one of his strengths. You could not make clear decisions when feelings were in the way. Feelings were noise. They obscured data. But this was not noise. This was a 3-year-old child who had woken up in the night, seen something that frightened her, kept it carefully in her small heart, and then, when the moment came, when the stakes were real and the fear was enormous, stood in the middle of a marble foyer in her duck pajamas and one sock and told the truth. Because her mother had taught her to. He looked at Lena, still kneeling on the floor, her face buried in her daughter's curls, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs she was clearly trying to contain. "She raised you right," he thought. He turned to the officers. "I need a few minutes with my fiancé," he said. The word came out flat, emptied of whatever warmth it might have once carried. "Then I'll have an updated statement for you." He turned toward the staircase. Vanessa had not moved from her spot on the steps. She was watching him with an expression that was working very hard to remain composed. Her smile had not entirely left her face. It was a stubborn smile, the kind that had survived many uncomfortable situations, but it had gone thin and tight at the edges. "Adrian," she said lightly, as he reached the bottom step. "Surely you're not going to take the word of a toddler." Adrian looked up at her. His eyes were the color of winter water, and right now they were just as cold. "I'm going to take the word," he said quietly, "of the only honest person in this room." He walked past her up the stairs. And behind him, on the foyer floor, Lily Thompson patted her mother's back and whispered, "See, Mommy? I told you. I fixed it." The conversation in the master suite lasted 11 minutes. The staff knew because Mrs. Huang, the head housekeeper, a small, watchful Chinese-American woman who had run the Cole household operations for over a decade, counted on the clock above the kitchen door. She stood with the other staff members, gardener Paolo, chef Dimitri, housekeepers Rosalind and Bet, driver Marcus, and 2 young assistants whose names no one ever seemed to remember, clustered near the kitchen entrance like passengers waiting for a storm to pass. They had heard a great many arguments in this house over the past 8 months. Since Vanessa arrived, there had been no shortage of them. But they had never heard Adrian's voice rise above a certain controlled register. They heard it now. Not shouting. Not quite. But there was something underneath the low, measured cadence that they recognized as fury in its most concentrated form. Fury that had been compressed until it was dense and airless, the way coal becomes diamond under enough pressure. A cold burning. Lena sat at the kitchen table with Lily in her lap, still in her pajamas, now wearing both socks because Mrs. Huang had found the missing one near the base of the staircase and returned it without a word. Dmitri had made hot chocolate. Lily wrapped both hands around the mug. It was almost comically large for her, and blew on the surface with great seriousness. "Is Mr. Adrian very mad?" she asked. Mrs. Huang said diplomatically, pouring herself a cup of tea.
"He seemed mad," Lily said.
"But not at Mommy. He seemed mad at the other lady." "Drink your chocolate, Mija," Lena said softly. Her voice was steady now. She had stopped shaking. But there were dark circles under her eyes, and her wrists, where the handcuff marks had faded from red to pink, gave away the story of the morning. She was 31 years old. She had been on her own since she was 19, when her mother passed, and the small savings account that had been meant for college tuition instead became the fund that kept her and her little brother fed while she figured out what came next. She had cleaned offices, waitressed, done laundry for a dry cleaner, and eventually worked her way into household staffing, where she was known for her reliability, her care, and the kind of quiet dignity that people with far more social power often failed to match. She had been hired by Cole Mansion 4 years ago, through an agency. She had never stolen a thing in her life. She had also never intended to fall apart in front of her daughter. She had managed it, barely. And Lily, sweet, fierce, impossible Lily, had held the whole thing together with her tiny hands and her duck pajamas and her absolute, unshakable faith in her mother's goodness. Lena pressed her lips to the top of her daughter's head and closed her eyes. "Where did you come from?" she thought, for approximately the 10,000th time in 3 years. "What did I do to deserve you?" The kitchen went quiet again. Outside the window, the first pale gold of autumn sunlight was beginning to push through the morning clouds. At 11 minutes and 40 seconds, the door of the master suite opened. They all heard it from the kitchen, the specific, deliberate sound of a handle turning and a heavy door swinging. Then footsteps. High heels. Quick and sharp against the marble, descending the staircase. Then another set. Heavier. Slower. Following. Then in the foyer, which carried sound like a concert hall, all that stone and open space, Adrian Cole's voice. "Arrangements will be made for your things to be shipped to your apartment in Manhattan. I'd like you gone from this property within the hour." There was a pause. Then Vanessa's voice, still controlled, still carrying that thin note of disbelief that powerful people produce when reality fails to cooperate. "Adrian, you're being absurd. This is a misunderstanding that a toddler has completely. You planted evidence on an innocent woman," Adrian said. "You used my home and my name to have her arrested. You looked me in the eye this morning and lied to me. That is not a misunderstanding, Vanessa. That is a choice." Another pause. "I have been with you for 2 years," she said, and for the first time, the control cracked slightly at the edges. 2 years, Adrian. And you're ending it because of... "I'm ending it," he said quietly, "because of what you are. I should have seen it sooner. That's my failure, not yours." Silence. Then heel clicks again, resuming their sharp percussion across the marble. The sound of the main entrance door opening, a large, heavy door that took a certain force to move, and then shutting. Then quiet. The kitchen held its breath. Adrian appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later. He had clearly stopped somewhere to compose himself because his expression was back to its default register, still, watchful, unreadable. He looked around the kitchen. 8 faces turned to him, ranging in expression from cautious to openly astonished. His eyes settled on Lena and Lily. Lily looked up from her hot chocolate. "Did you make the bad lady go away?" she asked. Lena startled. "Lily, it's fine," Adrian said. His voice was different in the kitchen, lower somehow, less formal. As if the kitchen had a different acoustic than the rest of the house. He walked to the table and sat down across from them, which surprised everyone including, it seemed, himself. He folded his hands on the table. He looked at Lily. "Yes," he said. "She's gone." Lily considered this. Nodded once, with solemn satisfaction. "Good," she said, and returned her hot chocolate. Lena opened her mouth, closed it, and then tried again. "Mr. Cole, I want you to know that I would never." "I know," he said simply. She stopped. "I know," he repeated. "I should have seen what was happening in my own household more clearly. I apologize for that, Lena. It will not happen again." In 23 years of managing, employing, and being employed by wealthy people, Mrs. Huang had never once heard one of them apologize to a member of household staff unprompted. She set down her teacup very carefully to avoid making a noise. Lena blinked. "Thank you," she said quietly. Adrian nodded. His gaze drifted back, almost involuntarily, to Lily. She had finished blowing on her chocolate and was now attempting to drink from the enormous mug, tipping it back with both hands and peering at him over the rim with large, dark, evaluating eyes. "You have chocolate on your nose," he told her. She crossed her eyes trying to look at it, then giggled. It was a small sound. A simple sound. The most ordinary sound in the world. Adrian Cole sat back in his chair, and something in his face, just briefly, just at the corners, softened. In the days that followed, the mansion underwent a quiet transformation. It wasn't the kind of change you could point to directly. No furniture was moved, no rooms were repainted. But the atmosphere shifted. The staff, who had spent 8 months navigating the minefield of Vanessa Holt's moods and demands, found themselves exhaling for the first time in what felt like years. Dimitri began cooking staff meals again with actual care. Mrs. Huang stopped flinching every time a door opened. Paolo played music from a small radio in the garden shed. The house, which had always been beautiful, began to feel less like a showroom and more like a place where people actually lived. Lena Martinez moved through her days with a careful kind of gratitude, aware of how close things had come to going very differently, aware that her daughter was watching her at all times, learning how to carry hard things with grace. Lily, for her part, had no interest in carrying anything quietly. She had decided, with the supreme confidence of a not-quite-4-year-old who had recently saved her mother from jail, that Cole Mansion was extremely interesting and deserved thorough investigation. Mrs. Huang, who had initially worried about a toddler loose in a 40-room estate, discovered within 24 hours that Lily Thompson was the most efficiently supervised child she had ever encountered, because the entire staff, all 9 of them, had independently decided to keep an eye on her. Paolo gave her a small basket and let her collect leaves from the garden. Dimitri taught her how to roll dough. Bet and Rosalind played cards with her on their lunch break. Marcus showed her how to sit properly in the driver's seat of the town car, where she gripped the wheel with both hands and made engine sounds. The only person who had not yet been thoroughly investigated was Adrian Cole. This was not for lack of interest on Lily's part. It was simply that Mr. Cole was, as Mrs. Huang explained in response to Lily's daily inquiry, very busy. He worked long hours. He ate alone at his desk. He moved through the mansion with the focused purposefulness of a man who had structured his entire life around the principle that time was the most finite resource and wasting it was the closest thing to a sin. He was also, if he was being honest with himself, which he was finding increasingly difficult, aware of the child. He would catch a flash of yellow duck pajamas as he turned a hallway corner, and she vanished around another. He would hear her laugh 2 rooms over and find himself pausing at his desk, head slightly tilted, the way you pause for a sound you weren't expecting and aren't sure you heard correctly. He had found, on one memorable occasion, a small handprint in the condensation on his office window, far too low to be any adult's. On a Thursday afternoon, 8 days after Vanessa's departure, he was in the library. The library was his favorite room in the mansion. 3 walls of floor-to-ceiling shelves, a large desk, 2 leather chairs by the fireplace that he had never once sat in with another person present. He was at the desk reviewing a portfolio analysis when he heard the door, which he had not latched, which was unusual, push open. He looked up. Lily Thompson stood in the doorway in a green dress he hadn't seen before, her curls pulled into 2 uneven pigtails, one sock higher than the other. She had a stuffed elephant tucked under one arm. She looked around the library with wide eyes, her expression cycling through awe, calculation, and arrival. "Hi," she said. Adrian set down his pen. "Hi."
She walked in.
He noticed she looked at the bookshelves the way some children look at a toy store, like she was trying to take full inventory before deciding where to start. She turned a slow circle. Then she looked at him. "Why is your house so big?" she asked. He considered the question seriously. "I bought it before I thought very carefully about how large it was," he said.
She processed this.
"That was a bad idea." "Probably," he agreed. She climbed into one of the leather chairs by the fireplace. It required some effort, and he watched her figure out the logistics of the stuffed elephant and the armrest without assistance, because something told him she would not want help, and settled herself with her feet dangling several inches above the floor. "Mommy says you saved her," she said. "You saved her," he said. "I just listened." Lily considered this as if it were a legal argument requiring careful deliberation. "We both saved her," she concluded generously. "Fair enough." She examined him from across the room. "Are you sad?" she asked. He blinked. "Why do you ask that?" She shrugged in the unself-conscious way of children who haven't yet learned to soften observations. "You look a little sad." Mommy looked like that after Daddy left. She didn't cry, but her face was different.
She paused.
"Is it because that lady went away?" Adrian was quiet for a moment. Outside the library windows, the garden was gold and copper in the October light. "No," he said finally. "Not because of that." "Then how come?" He looked at this child, this small, startlingly perceptive child with her stuffed elephant and her uneven pigtails, and thought about how to answer. He thought about the house that had felt enormous and hollow long before Vanessa arrived. He thought about the years of work that had filled the space where other things might have lived. He thought about sitting in this library for years, never once having anyone across from him in that other chair. "I think," he said carefully, "I've been very focused on work for a long time. And sometimes when you're very focused on one thing, you forget to tend to other things." Lily looked at her elephant, then at him. "Like plants," she said. "Mommy says if you forget to water plants, they get sad and droopy." "Yes," he said. "Exactly like plants." She nodded, satisfied with this explanation. Then she slid off the chair, tucking her elephant back under her arm, and walked toward the door. She paused at the threshold and turned back to look at him. "I could come and visit sometimes," she offered. "So you don't get droopy." Adrian Cole, feared, ruthless, fortress-walled Adrian Cole, felt something in his chest come entirely loose. "I'd like that very much," he said. She gave him a businesslike nod and walked away down the hall, her footsteps small and quick on the marble, humming something quietly to herself. He sat for a long moment in the empty library. Then he leaned back in his chair, turned to look at the second leather chair across from him, and, very quietly, smiled. November arrived with the particular soft insistence of a season that knows it owns the next several months. The maple along the east garden wall had gone entirely amber. Dmitri had begun making soup every afternoon, thick, fragrant, the kind that filled a kitchen with warmth and the smell of thyme. Lily had acquired, through methods that no one could fully account for, a small plastic watering can, and had taken it upon herself to water every plant in the mansion on a rotating schedule that she appeared to maintain entirely from memory. She had also, in the quiet way of small children who know exactly what they want, begun visiting the library every afternoon. It had not been discussed or arranged. It simply began happening. She would appear at the library door around 3 o'clock, elephant under arm, and knock twice on the door frame even when the door was open, because Lena had taught her manners and Adrian would say, "Come in," and she would climb into the leather chair across from him and either talk or not talk, depending on her mood. He looked forward to it in a way that he found difficult to examine directly, the way you can't look straight at the sun.
She told him things.
In the particular streaming, unprioritized way of 3-year-olds for whom all information is equally important, She told him about her friends from the playgroup Lena took her to on Saturdays, about the caterpillar she'd found near the garden wall that she was certain was thinking about being a butterfly, about the dream she'd had involving a purple dog, about how Dimitri had taught her to make what she called the wiggly egg, and what was technically a soft scramble. Adrian listened to all of it. He asked follow-up questions. He learned the names of her stuffed elephant, Gerald, her best friend at playgroup, a boy named Marco who she described as loud but nice, and her definitive ranking of soups. The orange one is best, the green one is suspicious. What he did not do in any of these afternoon visits was talk to Lena. Not because he avoided her. It was more that their interactions existed in a specific register, professional, courteous, respectful, and stepping outside of it felt like a motion he did not know how to make cleanly. She would bring coffee to the library sometimes when Lily was there, and she'd set it down and exchange a small smile with him that he would find himself thinking about for the rest of the afternoon without being entirely sure why. He had come to observe, remarkable.
Not in a grand way.
In a quiet, daily way that was somehow more impressive. She worked long hours and never complained. She spoke to every member of the staff with genuine warmth, not the performed kind. She remembered things, Mrs. Huang's bad knee, Marcus's daughter's school play, Paolo's dog's vet appointment, and asked about them. She was the only person in the house who could make Dimitri, a man of famously limited warmth, genuinely laugh. And she mothered Lily with the particular combination of fierce love and patient guidance that produced children who watered plants unprompted and told the truth even when it was scary. It was a Wednesday afternoon when Lena knocked on the open library door herself. Without Lily. Adrian looked up from his desk. She was in her uniform, dark trousers, white blouse, and she was holding a small envelope. She looked slightly uncertain in a way she rarely did. "I'm sorry to interrupt. Lily made you something. She wanted me to bring it." He set his pen down. "Please come in." She walked to the desk and held out the envelope. It was a regular white letter envelope, sealed with what appeared to be approximately 14 pieces of tape. His name was written on the front in large, determined purple crayon letters, Mr. Adrain. He felt something clench warmly in his chest. He picked it up carefully. "She's been working on the spelling," Lena said, with a softness in her voice that she hadn't intended to let show. He opened it carefully, peeling back the tape with more patience than he gave most documents worth significantly more. Inside was a folded piece of paper. He opened it. It was a drawing in crayon. On the left, a small figure with wild dark curls, next to a tall figure in a purple dress, clearly Lily and Lena. On the right, a very large figure with gray-blue scribbled eyes and an enormous smile, clearly him, rendered with the generous inaccuracy of a not-quite-4-year-old's artistic vision. All three figures were holding hands. Above them, in the same purple crayon, "My family." He stared at it for a long moment. "She asks about you, you know," Lena said quietly. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out the way true things sometimes do, unexpectedly, before the more careful part of yourself can stop them. "Every morning at breakfast. Is Mr. Adrian going to be busy today? Do you think Mr. Adrian likes soup? Do you think he's sad again?" He looked up from the drawing. Their eyes met across the desk. He was usually good at maintaining the particular neutrality of a man who had spent decades making sure his face gave nothing away. He was not, he realized, succeeding at it right now.
"She's worried about me," he said.
His voice was quieter than usual. "She worries about people she loves," Lena said simply. And then, as if hearing the weight of that word in the sentence she'd just produced, she looked down. "I should get back to Lena."
She stopped.
He stood up from his desk. The drawing was still in his hand. He looked at it again, the three crayon figures, the purple letters, "My family," and then at her. "I know this isn't," he paused. Chose his words with the care of a man who did not often find himself uncertain about what to say. "I know the circumstances here are unusual. And I would never want you to feel that your position," another pause. "What I mean to say is..." Lena looked at him for a long moment. Are you trying to ask me to dinner? She said. A beat. I am doing that very badly, he said. And Lena Martinez, for the first time in a long time, laughed, a full, unguarded, real laugh, and it moved through the library like sunlight into a room that had been closed for a winter. Yes, she said. I'd like that. He exhaled. In the hallway outside the library, at precisely ear height against the door frame, two small hands were pressed flat against the wall, and a very satisfied, almost 4-year-old stood on her tiptoes, listening, with Gerald the elephant tucked under her arm and a smile on her face as wide as the whole autumn sky. December came, and the mansion learned what it meant to be a home. It happened in small moments, the way all real changes do. Not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in the accumulated weight of 100 tiny, ordinary things. It happened when Lily talked Adrian into letting Paolo string lights along the garden wall, and the two of them stood at the library window watching the garden glow gold in the early dark, her small hand in his large one, and neither of them felt the need to say anything. It happened when Adrian appeared in the kitchen one Saturday morning in a way that was clearly intended to look casual and asked Dimitri, with studied nonchalance, whether crepes were difficult to make, and Dimitri, who had worked in this household for 11 years and had never once been asked a cooking question by its owner, stared at him for a full 3 seconds before teaching him the technique with such meticulous care that by the second attempt Adrian's crepe was almost perfect. Lily applauded both attempts with equal enthusiasm. It happened when Lena came to him quietly one evening with a folder of application materials and said that she had been thinking about going back to school. There was a hospitality management program at a college an hour away, and she'd always set the idea aside because it wasn't practical. And he said, without hesitation, do it. We'll make it work. And then, because she looked like she might argue, Lily will be fine. This household will be fine. You should do this. She had pressed her lips together for a moment and looked away, and he understood it was because she was not accustomed to people clearing the path in front of her instead of narrowing it. It happened when Mrs. Huang found Lily asleep on the library couch one afternoon, a picture book open on her chest, Gerald the elephant tucked under her chin, and Adrian at his desk working, not having called anyone because he hadn't seen any reason to move her. Mrs. Huang stood in the doorway and looked at them for a long moment. Then she went back to the kitchen and told Dimitri, in a voice that was entirely neutral, "It's going to be fine here." Dimitri looked up from his broth, said nothing, but he reached over and turned the radio up slightly. On Christmas Eve, the whole staff gathered in the main sitting room, a tradition that had technically existed for years but had been curtailed during Vanessa's tenure because she found it inefficient. Adrian had reinstated it without announcement, simply instructing Dimitri to prepare enough food for everyone and telling Mrs. Huang to let the staff know they were welcome. The room glittered. The large tree Paolo and Lily had decorated together, with the somewhat chaotic creative vision of a not-quite-4-year-old directing operations, listed slightly to the right and was heavy with ornaments on the bottom third, because that was the part Lily could reach. Adrian had examined it on the day it was finished and declared it the finest Christmas tree he had ever had, which Lily had received with the dignity of an artist whose work had been properly recognized. After dinner, when the plates had been cleared and Marcus had put on quiet music and the younger staff members were laughing about something on the other side of the room, Lena settled onto the window seat with Lily half asleep in her lap. The garden was dark and cold and strung with gold light. Snow had begun to fall, the first real snow of the season, slow and soft and indifferent to everything but itself. Adrian came and sat beside them. Lily opened one eye, assessed the situation, and transferred herself with the decisive sleepy ease of a child who trusts completely, climbing from her mother's lap to his, tucking her feet up and pressing her face against his shoulder. He went very still for a moment, that fraction of a second stillness of someone receiving something they hadn't known they were allowed to want. Then he put his arm around her, and she sighed and closed her eyes again. Lena watched. "You know," she said softly, She told me last week that she wanted to put you on the Christmas list. For Santa. He looked down at the sleeping child. What did she want to get me? Lena smiled. She said you needed a family, so you wouldn't get droopy. The words moved through him quietly, the way the snow was moving through the garden, soft and complete and changing the shape of everything. She already has everything she needs, he said, looking at Lily. She always has. She just didn't know how many people were about to figure that out. Lena looked at him for a moment. Then she leaned her head against his shoulder, lightly, tentatively, like a question being asked without words. He answered by staying very still, by staying present, by not pulling away, which was, for a man who had spent decades keeping the world at arm's length, one of the most significant things he had ever done. Outside, the snow covered the garden in white. The lights along the garden wall glowed soft and gold beneath it. Inside, Lily Thompson slept against the shoulder of a man who had been, 8 weeks ago, considered by the entire business world to be the coldest human being in any room he entered. He had been changed not by a revelation or a grand event or a force that matched his own. He had been changed by 11 words spoken by a 3-year-old in duck pajamas on a cold marble floor. My mommy didn't do it.
She's good. She's the best.
By a child who had understood, with a clarity that all his 41 years and $43 billion had not yet taught him, that love was not a weakness. That standing up for someone, even when your legs were shaking, was the bravest thing a person could do. That the truth, simple, plain, unpolished, was always worth the fear. He had been taught that by someone not yet 4 years old. He thought, looking around the room, at Mrs. Huang laughing at something Paolo had said, at Dimitri quietly refilling glasses, at Lena warm at his side, at the imperfectly decorated tree listing cheerfully to the right, that he had never, in 41 years, felt as rich as he did right now. And it had absolutely nothing to do with money. In the spring, he would ask Lena a question. She would say yes. Mrs. Huang would cry and claim she had allergies. Dimitri would make a cake that was, objectively, the most beautiful thing he had ever produced. Paolo would plant roses along the garden wall. Marcus would wash the car 3 times in preparation for a celebration that did not require a car. And Lily Thompson, 4 years old by then, with slightly better spelling and the absolute unshakable certainty of a child who had always known things would turn out exactly this way, would wear a white dress with yellow ducks embroidered on the collar, because she had specifically requested it, and she would stand between the 2 people she loved most in the world and hold both of their hands. And she would look up at them with those wide, dark, knowing eyes, and she would smile. My family. In purple crayon. Every word exactly right. The end.